the place we exist, connect, and create, is the traditional unsurrendered territory of the Abenaki people, one of 5 Wabanaki nations who have a continued and enduring presence with this land. Presence with mountains, with vistas, with forests, waters, and winds. Presence with people, relations, with culture and creations. Presence with light. In Abenaki, Waban refers to the white flickering light in the sky, and a key is the word for land or the earth. So the Wabanaki are the people of the Dawnland. We acknowledge Wabanaki ancestors, past, present, and future. And we're aware that the auto captioning does not always spell words correctly, including Abenaki. So Kat, at some point we'll put the accurate spelling of Abenaki in the chat box, and also the information for the Vermont Abenaki Artists Association.
Yeah, that's in there right now, folks. Hi. Heidi, did you want to do a brief introduction to yourself and then I'll go in?
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning. My name is Heidi Swevens. I use she, they pronouns. For access purposes, I'm going to do a visual description of myself and surroundings. I have blue eyes and pale skin with short brown hair. Today I'm wearing a plaid button-down shirt and a black vest, and behind me is a rectangular abstract painting against a white wall. I'm the Director of Community Partnerships at Inclusive Arts Vermont, and I'm thrilled to be with everybody today, including my colleague Kat Redness and Peter Jewett from Accessible Web. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kat for more accessibility and introductions. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Heidi. Hi, everyone. My name is Kat Redness, and I am the Director of Communications and Development for Inclusive Arts Vermont. I use she, her pronouns. I am a platinum blonde, kind of choppy. I have a choppy blonde haircut with shaggy bangs. I'm a chubby-cheeked, pale-skinned person, and I'm sitting in my sunroom. So I have a lot of sunlight on my face. I'm wearing a dark green tank top, and I have some visible shoulder tattoos and metallic earrings. Behind me are some big bright windows looking into a suburban neighborhood. That's me. I will be kind of your tech person today, getting everybody all set and in. And so I just want to go over a couple of things, and then we're going to hand it right over to Peter. So first, welcome. If you are here with us and you want to introduce yourself in the chat box, feel free to do that. The chat box is a great place. You can introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, anything that you'd like to get out of that. That's also a great place for questions, and I'll be monitoring those throughout the discussion as Peter and Heidi are sharing. The other thing too, we're all humans. Take care of yourself. If you need to step away, if you have kids that come into the screen, if you've got animals, we get it. We're all working from different places. And so please feel free to take care of your human self first. And we're so glad you're joining us today. There are multiple ways to participate. You can participate in the chat, ask questions, offer comments, things like that. You can also raise, a virtual hand and share verbally as well. And we'll be monitoring that as well. And then if you do speak, if you are on camera, we ask that you do a brief share about yourself and surroundings, just like Heidi and I did, and that's an access purpose for folks who can't access visual information on the screen. Also, Peter, you'll see this. Peter's going to use a lot of slides. We're going to do brief verbal descriptions of those, but those will be available after. So there may be some information we don't capture every little bit, but those will be available after. And then this session is being recorded, and it will be available after on the Vermont Arts Council website. Peter's slides will also be available there. And so I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. And also, all of the previous access workshops that we've done, the YouTube links are there too. So if you want to go back and see any of the prior ones, and then also any of the future ones will be there as well. So that is me. I'm going to pop also kind of our brief agenda into the chat box as well. And that way we'll have that and you'll kind of see where we're going. And with that, I'm going to introduce Peter Jewett, who's here with Accessible Web for us. And Peter, you want to introduce yourself and get us started?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. I am Peter Jewett, the founder of Accessible Web. So I use the pronouns he and him. I am a pale-skinned male with a beanie hat on and a mustache and a gray polo fleece sweater. I'm in my house in Huntington, Vermont, in my office. So behind me, I've got a little artwork my son made a few years back, and some trees in the woods in the background behind me. So I have a presentation put together today. I'm going to share my screen right now. I'm also going to keep the chat open. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to hop in the chat. Let me make sure I can do this. There we go. Give me a moment to get set up. Chat disappeared when I shared my screen. All right, so Accessible Web is a company I founded in 2016. So I've got an agency that runs in Burlington called Bytes Co. Founded that in 2010. And then around 2016, semi-embarrassingly, accidentally discovered web accessibility. So I built this amazing website for Hubbardton Forge. They're a high-end lighting company down in Hubbardton, in Castleton area. And so was showing it to my mother-in-law, Annette, over Thanksgiving, and was really proud of this website. It looked amazing, better than anything we'd ever built. And at that point, we'd built hundreds of websites at Bytes Co. And so I'm showing it to my mother-in-law, and she has some degenerative vision issues. And Annette says to me, she's very clearly pretending to use a website. And I'm, Annette, what are you pretending? Can you not see this? And she lets me know that the website doesn't zoom like websites usually do, and that there's low contrast on the page. So, I kind of tail between my legs, I guess, went home from Thanksgiving and back to the office and started looking up how to make websites zoom, and semi-accidentally found the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So at that point in time, it was nothing I'd ever seen before. It's a pretty widely adopted set of standards to make websites accessible, and immediately saw the opportunity, realizing that we couldn't be alone at Bytes Co. in not understanding any of this or not thinking about this, and that this might be an opportunity to spin up another business to help anyone building, maintaining, designing websites to do it in an accessible manner. So 2016, that's where we spun up Accessible Web, and I'll go from there, I guess. So going to start with a history of the ADA, get into some ADA demand letters and lawsuits, talk about widgets and overlays, some common misconceptions, and then get into web content accessibility guidelines, put together a couple examples of things to be thinking about today. There's a lot to it, so by no means is this going to be a comprehensive presentation, but we do have office hours next week, I believe, where I'll get one or two of our audit team members, our accessibility team members, to join me, and we can really dive into technical questions. So agenda item 1, history of the ADA. So the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law July 26, 1990. Purpose of preventing discrimination and ensuring the same opportunities for Americans with disabilities. It was modeled after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act in 1973. There's 3 main parts to the ADA. Title I is regulations regarding employment. Title II is regulations that implement the ADA for state and local governments. And then Title III are regulations that implement the ADA for businesses and nonprofit organizations. So today I'm going to be speaking mostly about Title III considerations, but obviously the Title II and Title I also come into play on this. So when the ADA was written, it was written to be open-ended, and they weren't necessarily thinking in 1990 about how pervasive the web was going to be in our lives today, and 2022, and even back a few years. So the ADA does not explicitly say that it applies to the website. It's mostly focused on physical accommodations on that Title III side of things. But over time, there's been a series of lawsuits, which I'll get into in a moment, that the judges in these cases and the attorneys, they've set legal precedent. And at this point, there's just some exciting guidance that came out the other day. I'll hop over to this link. So on March 18th of this year, the Department of Justice is kind of continuously reaffirming and clarifying that this legal precedent does apply to websites. And so there's some guidance now on the ADA website, and it basically goes into why this matters, and then who it applies to and how to make your website accessible. So this is all stuff I'm going to get into, but over time, the Department of Justice is kind of continually affirming this, and our hope at Accessible Web is that they make things a lot more clear. Up in Canada, for example, there's a law called the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, that's very clear about which businesses it applies to, what the timelines are for making your websites accessible, what the penalties are if you don't. In the United States, for, you know, in typical US fashion, we're kind of leaving it up to the lawyers at the moment. There's a ton of other laws in the world as well. So there's the AODA in Canada, UK Equality Act of 2010, all public Europa websites must adhere to Wcag. And Wcag is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So it's a set of standards maintained by the W3C. I'll get to it in a minute. But right here on the slide, I'm showing a map that has various countries around the world with the various laws and the level of web contents accessibility guidelines need to be met. So those of you, really all of you, right, you have websites, it's the World Wide Web, everyone can access it. So the good news on this is that there's not a US specific standard. There was initially, but at this point, everything's kind of pointing to the WCAG. So at least worldwide, we have a single set of standards that we can adhere to make our websites accessible for folks with disabilities. You know, the importance of the ADA, 61 million Americans live with a disability. So 2 in 5 adults over the age of 65 have a disability. You know, we like to encourage people to think of us all as just temporarily abled. At any point, if we live long enough, we'll probably end up with some sort of disability. And, you know, like there's always accidents. You could break your arm at any time, and, you know, there's temporary issues that might pop up. So, you know, don't think about this as for those people. Think about it for all of us, you know, like let's just do this to make the web more accessible for everybody. 10% of the US population has an invisible disability that you might not even recognize, seeing them walk around the, you know, walking on the street, or even in your day-to-day interactions with them in the workplace, or, you know, wherever you might be meeting. And then disabilities come in many forms. There are mental health, visual, physical, hearing, learning, and intellectual disabilities. So there's a lot to it. And the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines tries to kind of address all of these. And the number of disabilities in America grows each year due to lessening stigma and a growing population with lack of access to healthcare. So this is a, you know, increasingly important thing for us to be thinking about. All right, so moving into ADA demand letters and lawsuits. So in 2008, the first real lawsuit that happened, and we're actually networked in pretty well with the attorney that made this happen. It's a guy that's actually on the board of the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center. So he worked with the NFB pretty extensively. The NFB hired him and his law firm and said, hey, we want you to go after these big companies and enforce this law. We believe that the ADA should apply to the web the way it's written. We want you to go sue Microsoft. We want you to go sue AOL and try to set some you know, legal precedents that we can actually start enforcing this. The first few companies that they sued, they settled. So these companies that settled, great, they agreed to move forward and make their websites accessible. But what they really needed was someone that wanted to fight this in court, because until it went to court and a judge ruled on it, that was a moment that set legal precedent. So Target in 2008, so I have a timeline here on my screen, 2008 was kind of the first one, and the NFB sued Target. They fought back, and the judge in this case ruled that companies that had a physical location in a state had to have websites that were accessible to users in that state. So at this point, it was a pretty landmark case, but it was tied to having a physical location. In 2012, Netflix was sued on behalf of deaf users, and they ruled in that case because Netflix thought that this didn't apply to them because they didn't have physical locations. But the judge ruled in this case that because we're living in a modern world. Netflix should be considered a public accommodation that everyone has the rights to use. So in this case, the judge ruled that the physical location didn't matter, but that Netflix had to put up, accessibility features, including closed captioning for users that are deaf and hard of hearing. Harvard and MIT, this was a pretty landmark. In 2016, there was another ruling that said all content at their university, including recordings and online courses, must be accessible. So now it kind of expanded into the education space and online learning and offline learning. And then Winn-Dixie had a case that said their website must be accessible as it's so heavily integrated with their physical stores. Blue Apron had a case in 2017. Again, they don't have a physical store, but they had to have an accessible website. And then probably the most recent of these cases is Domino's Pizza in 2019. So Domino's went to court and they said, yeah, we get this legal precedent, but their goal was to get this up to the Supreme Court because Domino wanted to get some clarification into the requirements. They said, this isn't right that these lawyers are out here just suing everybody and no one's really clear on what the requirements are. So they wanted to get it up. Right now it's running on circuit court level with these precedents. They wanted to elevate it to the Supreme Court. But in this case, the Supreme Court declined to hear it because they felt that the lower courts had the right, had made the decision. It didn't need to go up another level. And so Domino's was forced to make their website and their mobile app accessible to all users. So we have this kind of progressively expanding requirement for web accessibility, within the ADA that's been kind of changing over time. So what's happening right now is lawyers are cruising around the web, basically mailing demand letters to you. So this is a tricky thing, right? On one hand, it's great that this law is being enforced for folks, to help folks with disabilities have great experiences on the web. And we really believe that, if the physical world can be made to be accessible, why not the digital world? Of all places, this should be the digital world. The web should be so far ahead of the physical world in terms of web accessibility because we don't have physical constraints. But that's not happening. And so what's happened is lawyers have seen these court cases, and there's a ton of law firms out there doing this now. What they're doing is they're basically visiting a website, running an automated scan tool on it, finding a variety of issues, and then mailing letters to business owners saying, and maybe gallery owners saying, we have someone here that's been discriminated against. We are going to sue you unless you pay us $10,000, $20,000, whatever number they seem to grab out of the hat. You can settle with us for this amount of money, and you have to make the website accessible. Otherwise, we're going to drag you into court. You're going to have to pay lawyers' fees. You're undoubtedly going to lose because this is very clear precedent. So it's really tough because business owners that don't know this is a requirement, and we've been doing this long enough to know that there's probably only a small segment of your websites, your organizations that are accessible. It's really kind of this, you could call them ambulance chasers, you could call them trolls, but there's a lot of letters going out, and there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out how to get their websites updated. The other thing too to be aware of is it's not just the ADA in terms of nonprofit organizations. So a lot of you probably rely on federal funding and grants. So there might be educational grants. So there's other laws on the books that are also applicable. There's Section 508, which says that any organization that's receiving federal funding has a duty to procure accessible tools and services. And then there's Section 504 that ties into education, which says, everyone has access to an equal education. So anyone with kind of Section 504 or school-related programs, this is a requirement that you have. So the letters aren't necessarily just going to come from, lawyers that are trolling around the web. We've also seen a lot of letters come from the Department of Education, Civil Rights Office, for example, saying that websites need to be upgraded to meet WCAG, or the organization risks losing its federal funding. So if you receive one of these letters, kind of the first thing that we recommend is to consult an attorney. Get in touch with your attorney, especially on the ADA side of it. And then if you're getting a Section 504 or Section 508, maybe you want to talk to whoever the organization was that is giving your grant and just let them know you're on top of it. Don't try to fight this. Don't try to, argue with it. It's a pretty hard requirement at this point. So the best thing you can do is kind of, be open and honest with your stakeholders and let them know you're working on it. And then step 2 is contract with a third-party organization like Accessible Web, who can really help you to implement the necessary upgrades on your website or web applications. And then any good company, a third party, is going to help you create a timeline, a plan. Like, this stuff takes work to do properly. It takes resources. So there's not really anyone out there that's going to think this is going to be done immediately. So come up with a plan, and usually the Department of Education, the letters we've seen, they're cool with a 1 to 2 year plan, but they need to know that you're taking it seriously and that you're working on it, and implementing this stuff as your budget allows. ADA lawsuits. This is a slide right here that basically shows in 2020, 2021, the top industries that received ADA demand letters. It's everyone: retail and e-commerce, digital media and agencies, banking, financial, food service, healthcare, travel and hospitality, automotive, and education. So pretty much every organization is seeing increases in these letters. And just broadly too, the US government has been enforcing this now more than ever. So especially with everything going online during COVID, anyone with educational programs, this has always been a law. This has always been a requirement when you signed up to get grants, but it's kind of hasn't been enforced, and therefore a lot of people have just kind of ignored it, so know that it's kind of picking up on an enforcement level. And then here's just a graph showing that the ADA lawsuits are increasing over time. And it's bar graph, shows 2018, we had 2,314 lawsuits in the country. 2019, there were 2,890. 2020, there were 3,505. 2021, there were 4,195. And these are the lawsuits that went to court. So these are the ones that we can count, but this is a very small subset of the actual lawsuits happening, because most people are settling it. Most people are going to their attorneys, and their attorneys say, yeah, this is a thing, you got to fix it. So just be aware that in 2021, there were 4,000 that went to court, 4,195, but that's a small fraction of all of the lawsuits who are actually happening. So third kind of agenda item is widgets and overlays. So you all have probably been around the web, and some of you maybe even have these on your own website, but there's a technology out there offered by companies like Accessible, AudioEye, UserWay, that's called a overlay or a widget. And these companies claim that for $79 a month, you can put a single piece of JavaScript on your website, and it's going to make your website fully accessible. And everyone's probably seen the little icons in the back of or bottom of a screen. Maybe they have the a person with kind of arms outspread. You click it and a tray slides out, showing accessibility features. Maybe it's got a screen reader in this tray. It's got color contrast switchers. It's got a way to zoom your text up. So these widgets and overlays, the problem with them is that they create a veneer of accessibility for folks that don't have disabilities and don't rely on assistive technologies. So if you have a disability, if you're blind, you probably use a screen reader. If you're low vision, you probably need to zoom up your text. If you're colorblind, you probably need to have certain color contrast combinations. If you're deaf or hard of hearing, you might need closed captioning. If you don't have use of your hands, so you can't use a mouse, you need to be able to use a keyboard to input stuff. So the problem with these overlay technologies is that if you have an actual disability, let's say that you are low vision and you need to zoom up, you arrive at a website and you have your whole computer set up to be zoomed up to 400% so you can see stuff. You arrive at a website and you're expected to somehow find a small little icon in the bottom of the screen, click it, and then that opens it up, and then you're supposed to find the zoom toggle on this tool. It's a wrong way of doing it. You should arrive at the website, and the website should respect your 400% zoom that you already have in place. you know, if you're a screen reader user, you should land on a website and it should just work correctly. You shouldn't need to find a little accessibility icon in the footer and then turn on a screen reader and learn a whole new, you know, technology with different commands and whatnot. So accessibility overlays are kind of snake oil. There's on this next slide, they will not protect you from ADA lawsuits. They will not protect you and solve this situation if you have a Department of Education or a Section 508 requirement. You really need to do this correctly from the ground up. And on top of this, we've got a lot of lawsuits that are being filed now that target people that are using these different overlays. So in addition to this just being a disingenuous solution, by using something like Accessibility or AudioEye, any one of these overlay companies, you're really kind of painting a target on your back because you're just an easy person to sue at that point. So some common misconceptions around this. You know, it's not really if this is going to happen at this point, but when. So one of the things we want you to think about is like, be proactive. You don't want to be in a situation where you're going to have to struggle to get this implemented quickly. You're going to have to reassign budgets around, you know, maybe lay off a staff member or something to pay for this project. So this is a real thing. So be proactive about it. Don't wait until you get this letter in the mail. Start working on it now. And it's like the saying, you know, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. So get started on this. Start making incremental improvements. You know, this is a journey. This isn't a destination. So really start working on it because then when you do get one of these letters from whoever, you can at least say, look, we're working on this. We're sorry, we're not 100% accessible quite yet, but we want to help. We want to do the right thing. So just let us know what your problem is. We'll help you, solve this problem. Maybe it's a blind user that's on the website. They can't view something. So anyway, get started. We always recommend having an accessibility policy on your site, having a form or at least contact info so someone can get in touch with you if they're having trouble using your website. And then, definitely making sure that you respond when somebody does bring up issues. So kind of myth one, accessibility is expensive and resource draining. The truth is, if you do it proactively, accessibility can be a sustainable project. Working proactively is also less costly than settling a demand letter or lawsuit. Violations are liable up to $95,000 in damages. So you're better off fixing this now and getting yourself in a defensible position, putting up the money instead of paying lawyers down the road because you're just totally ignoring this and blind to it. Misconception two is I can avoid demand letters because of my business size. So a lot of small businesses say, well, why are they coming after me? And we've seen really small companies get hit by these things. So just because you're small, these lawyers don't really care. On some level, they're kind of automating the process of sending these letters. For example, we have another agency that we've worked with in Burlington here. They had a client that was at a boat show in Vegas, and among all these other boat manufacturers. And when they got home, everyone received a letter from the same law firm claiming they had been discriminated against. So these lawyers are just kind of finding lists of businesses, running some easy tools to see if they're accessible or not, and then just printing out a letter. So these businesses or these lawyers don't care how big you are. They're just really looking for quick paydays. So no matter what size you are, you should get started on fixing this stuff now. And then myth two, there isn't a large enough demand to make accessibility worth it. Again, a quarter of Americans have some sort of disability. Those of you that really target older generations too, obviously this is the, Green Mountain State. We have this whole graying of the Green Mountains happening. Like all of Northern New England, we have an older population. So this is a big chunk of the population, and doing stuff in an accessible manner can help older folks just as much as it can help folks with the disabilities we would typically think of. It's not a legal requirement. Yes, it is. It's definitely 100% a legal requirement, and you will lose funding if it's something you don't pay attention to. You will be sued, and if you end up receiving one of these letters in the mail, you will have to deal with it. You will have to pay up. You will have to move forward with fixing this stuff. So, all right. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So this is an international standard that's maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C. So Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, abbreviated Wcag, Wcag, and there are 3 levels. There's single A, that's the lowest bar, double A is the middle bar, and then triple A is the highest bar. Most of the projects we work on are double A. Most of the laws around the world are going to point to double A. And then in the US, Section 508, Section 504, and the ADA, if you can achieve WCAG AA conformance, you will be in compliant with all applicable US laws. And it's just a level that provides a solid experience for folks with disabilities. If you are really wanting to do this like super, super well, and you are generally, we wouldn't recommend AAA unless you're starting from scratch and building something new from the ground up. But AAA is the highest level of conformance. So we kind of treat it a little bit aspirational. We haven't had any clients that have actually reached it yet. So AAA is something that you really probably only want to start thinking about if you've got the budget for it, if you really want to do a solid job on this, and after you've already achieved AA. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is broken up into 4 main principles. A website has to be perceivable. So information and user interface components must be presented to users in ways they can perceive with their assistive technologies. It needs to be operable. User interface components and navigation must be operable. Someone needs to be able to interact with the stuff on the page. So they need to be able to keyboard navigate through a form. They need to be able to use a mouse. So they need to, whatever their assistive technology is, it needs to work with that assistive technology. Understandable. So information in the operation of user interface must be understandable. So it needs to be organized and formatted in a way that people with different cognitive levels and different assistive technologies can not just see what's on the page or perceive what's on the page, but actually understand what's on there. And then robust is, content must be robust enough so that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technology. So user agents mean browsers for the most part. So a lot of folks that are blind, for example, use their mobile phones. iOS has amazing accessibility features. Android does too. There's always changes happening to assistive technologies and browsers. So ideally, we want to build websites and applications in a way that they are going to support current technologies and future technologies. So I'm going to pull up the WCAG quick reference website here. So this is one that we like to use quite a bit. It presents WCAG in a organized manner. And you can see here on the left side, we have the list of success criteria. So there's, how many do we have? We have 78 success criteria that you need to check on every single page of your website. So one example is 1.1.1 is non-text content. So all non-text content that is presented to the user has a text alternative that serves the equivalent purpose. This goes into techniques and failures. WCAG has a lot of interpretation. So as I click into this, it's expanding a list of, probably 20 different ways to deal with this single success criteria. So there's a lot here. It can be really intimidating. This is where I'd recommend diving in and then ideally working with a company that can help you interpret this and help you understand this, because our business basically is around because the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are pretty intimidating and people need some help with understanding how to interpret them, how to implement them properly and confidently. So this is a great tool to go in and be able to understand all the different success criteria. You can go in and filter to just show level A, single A, and double A. You can look at different tags like development, interaction design, content creation, visual design. So different members of your organization that are interacting with the website in different ways. It's kind of organized for them. There's some sufficient techniques, different ways to fix it, advisory techniques, how to find failures. And then it's broken down also by some technologies. So you can really get into whether the HTML things to think about, CSS, PDF, client-side, server-side scripting. So this tool we really love to use because it's a lot easier to understand. There's also a main W3 WCAG website that has all this stuff written down, but this one's interactive. It's really usable and helpful to start to wrap your head around this stuff. Okay, so some examples here. And again, we're going to be talking about this during office hours. Link in the chat to the reference site. Yep. We're going to be talking about this at the office hours. Let me get to it. But if anyone has specific stuff, I would say, feel free to ask a question after this, or, the office hours, we're going to have two of our accessibility specialists joining me, and we can really dive into details. At this point, I'm the founder, I'm the sales guy. I don't want to profess to be as skilled as my team that is doing this day in and day out and really diving into the nitty-gritty details. But I will jump in here and give you some just quick examples. So for designers, success criteria 1.4.3, minimum contrast. This is a level A success criteria. You need to make sure there's enough contrast between text and its background color. So this is for low vision users, people that might be colorblind. So the contrast ratio between text and text background should be at least 4.5 to 1. If your font is at least 24 pixels or 10 pixels bold, the minimum drops to 3 to 1. Be especially careful with text over images. And then we list out, there's a few different tools here that we have listed to help select color palettes. And then if you need to find the hex codes for colors on your site, there's some eyedropper tools that are helpful as well. Another one is for designers, 1.4.1, use of color. So this is a level A success criteria. So don't indicate important information using color alone. We see this a ton with graphs on websites and web applications where there might be a bar graph and one column is red, one's blue, one's green. You're supposed to understand with a key that the different color denotes different information. That's not acceptable for someone that has, that is colorblind and can't see those colors. So there should be another indicator such as icons or underlining, or a lot of times we'll use different patterns. So you can use colors just in collaboration with patterns to denote information. And then we have an example here of a table that is kind of an agenda for a conference where it says blue is the SEO track, green's the SEM track, red is the social track. And then this table below just uses a color to denote this. This isn't going to work for somebody that has color blindness. You have to put some sort of label on it so that they understand what they're looking at. For designers, 2.4.7, focus visible. This is a level AA. So design focus states to help users navigate and understand where they are. So focus state means that when you're moving through, you should be able to navigate any website or application using just a keyboard. Everyone thinks of a mouse as kind of the most common input device, but really the universal input device for a computer is considered to be the keyboard. So on any website, you should be able to hit tab and see the active state, the focus state, move through the different clickable elements on that page. And then here we have an example with a form that is showing the active state so that someone using a keyboard or entering text in can see where their cursor is currently active on the page. So in this example, there's a blue background around the form field, the input field for a phone number. So you got to make sure that you have an active state, don't hide it, and make sure that it's always, everything someone can interact with on a page is highlighted so that they can see visually and understand that they can interact with this element. For content creators, 1.1.1, non-text content, level A, write descriptive alt text for your images. So this is one of like the most common things that people think about. An image on your website, if it's not decorative, it needs to be read by a screen reader. So someone with a screen reader isn't just going to be able to see a photo. So there's something called an alt text that when you upload an image, you would also write an alt text that describes it. So don't just describe it as photographs. Don't just describe it as flowers. Here we have a picture of a, well, our alt text for it is white trillium flowers in bloom in a forest. So most of your tools that you use to make websites should be able to allow you to put alt tags on the photos, and make sure you're writing, alt text that is really descriptive and describes to people what they're looking at in this graphic file. For content creators, 2.4.4, link purpose and context. Links should be descriptive. So all over the web, and it was funny because even, funny's not the word, but even on this guidance here, so I just pulled up this Department of Justice page. When they first launched this on March 18th, they had, instead of the full guidance is available here, they had only made here the link. And so if you're using a screen reader, you are able to display all the links that are on a page so that you can decide where you want to click. It's important that the link text has context to it, because the word here is not telling anybody what's on the other side of that link. Whereas the full guidance is available here. Now somebody knows that if I click on this, here's what I can expect to see. So can't even explain the amount of websites, that say click here, or read more. Don't use link text like that. Make the link text describe where someone is going. Just expand it out a little bit, make it unique so that before someone clicks on it, they can have some context into where they're going. Content creators, 2.4.6, headings and labels, level AA. Use headings to logically organize content. So the same way you would do in kind of a Word doc or creating an outline, you have headings, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. Organize your content under headings, because someone using a screen reader or a search engine bot or a lot of different assistive technologies, they can jump between the headings to get to the content that they want to see. And really any user would benefit from this. So here we have an example that says Beatles, and then heading 2 is external morphology. Heading 3 is head. Heading 4 is mouth parts under head. And then we'd go back to a heading 3 for thorax, and then a heading 4 for prothorax and pterothorax. So organize your content using headings, and ideally paragraph tags underneath that, so that there can be some organization. And if someone just wants to read about the prothorax of a beetle, they know where they can jump and they can get into that information. All right, so parsing for developers, this is 4.1.1 level A. Use the correct HTML element for your content. So, there's a difference between links and buttons. Links are supposed to go somewhere else. Buttons are supposed to help you interact with something on the page. So make sure you're choosing the right thing when you're doing this. Make sure you're using headings, H1 to H6. Make sure your navigation is wrapped in a nav tag up in the top, so that a screen reader can skip over it and get right to the content. Your content should be organized in a content tag. So modern HTML5 allows us to write websites in properly formatted elements to provide screen readers, pretty much any user, and search engines. There's a huge advantage for search engine optimization here, just general usability. It's going to help your website work on a bunch of different devices, but it's also really important for accessibility. So, make sure you're writing good, clean code. Be careful about what page builders you might be using, what platform you're choosing to use. So some kind of like Wix, for example, is kind of notoriously challenging. It might seem great because you can just quickly build the pages you want, or like Divi Builder and WordPress, it might seem great on the surface because, oh, wow, I can do all these different layouts on my own. The challenge there is that, it's not outputting good, clean code. So ideally, work with a developer that can code your website properly, and then be mindful when you are upgrading stuff and editing your website. And then for developers, 2.1.1, this is level A, support keyboard navigation. So like I said, the keyboard's a universal input device. You should be able to tab through, hit enter when you hit any kind of interactive element. So rely on CSS to move stuff around instead of actually reordering the HTML. Hide elements from tab flow, and then avoid hiding form elements, but not removing them from tab flow. So make sure that anything you're putting on the web, you can operate with a keyboard. All right, so we got like 3 minutes. So I'm going to do a quick shameless plug of Accessible Web, I guess. So we work with our customers to help them implement web accessibility from the ground up. We think of ourselves as a tooling product company and an education company. We're offering services right now just because that's the first step for most of our customers in helping to learn how to do this work properly. But really, we want to help you learn to do this correctly. That's really the only way we're going to be able to improve the entire web, is not just by trying to sell our services every time someone comes in the door, but trying to help you understand how to assemble a team and do this work correctly. So we believe in people-powered accessibility. We're not going to profess to be AI driven like these accessibility companies. We believe that the best way to do this is to train both our internal team and then leverage our internal team to train your external team. So our entire team is certified by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, the IAAP. I'd recommend getting a certified professional in accessibility core competency certification if you're really interested in learning how to do this properly. There's a variety of paths, we believe. This isn't a one-size-fits-all type of thing. We want to work with organizations, their timelines, their goals, their budgets, the staff you have, to help you start working on this and start on this journey. And then we're really community focused. So we want to be engaged with folks with disabilities and the various communities of folks with disabilities. So we're trying to really build up a group of people that want to do this right, are committed to doing this right, and make sure that we're listening. There's a saying in the community, nothing about us without us. So the idea is that we're not kind of dictating these accessibility laws. The folks with disabilities should be driving this, and we should be here listening and helping to implement the tools that they need to be able to browse the web. Preventing demand letters. So number one, monitor your website, figure out kind of what your baseline is. So we have a tool called our page monitoring where we can ingest a website and run it through some automated checks. The automated checks only catch 35% of WCAG success criteria. So it's not everything, but it's a good starting point. It can let you see, are you failing or are you kind of like doing okay? Ideally, consult as you build. Try to shift accessibility left. Accessibility is not a QA step at the end of a process. It should be something you're thinking about from design to content creation to development. And the earlier you think about it, the less you have to rework stuff that you've already done. So, the best way to implement this is foundationally, and then layering on top web accessibility considerations as you move through a project. Then remediate over time. So, you usually shouldn't think of this as just a one-stop project to upgrade your website. Realistically, it takes time to do this work, especially if you haven't thought about it from the ground up. So think about just starting to make progress and getting yourself in the habit of thinking about this as something that needs to be something that needs to be done every time you add a blog post or a page to your website. And then our tools, we can go through a full manual audit and help you certify that your website is fully WCAG conforming. So when you've kind of exhausted your internal resources and what you're able to do yourself, you might consider working with a third party to do it right. We have a tool called Accessible Web Ramp. We're not sure what the R stands for yet. It's kind of a backronym, but it's the Rapid Accessibility Marketplace. So this meeting, this presentation today is either good or really bad timing, but we're actually rolling out our name change in the next day or two. So on our website, it might be called Console right now. It might be called Ramp right now. I don't know. I got to check after this meeting, but moving forward, we're going to call our platform Ramp, and we're trying to be an all-in-one SaaS tool that can get you everything you need to handle any kind of web accessibility project. We have our Accessible Web Academy, and I'm going to follow up in the next day or two with a coupon code to give a discount for anyone that wants to go through our Accessible Web Academy. So we have developed our own LMS, learning management system, with various courses for different tracks. So if you want to learn about how to implement this stuff, we have an academy, so you can take courses for designers, developers, leaders, marketing, understand how to implement this, why this works. It'll kind of be a very in-depth version of the presentation I'm quickly running through today. Then we offer audits and certifications. So we have a process where you really, if you want to comprehensively do this work, you need to start from the automated stuff and then move through every page on your website or every template on your website and check for every WCAG success criteria. So if you have received a letter, or if you really just want to do this thoroughly, our team has a process where we can help you do that and guide your developers in doing the remediation work. And at Bytes Co., our agency, we also offer remediation work. So if you don't have a web developer on staff or available that can help you do this stuff, and a lot of it is a little bit more technical when we get into code stuff, be aware that we can help. And then finally, we do UX testing with real users with disabilities. And we don't advise doing this until you've kind of fixed the code first. So do the UI first before you do UX. We're in Vermont, so I use skiing as an example a lot. You got to make sure you have skis, boots, poles, bindings, ideally a helmet and proper apparel before you go up on the mountain. That's kind of UI. Make sure you have all the pieces in place, or else there's no point going up the mountain if you don't have skis on, right? And then UX is, all right, you're going down the mountain and your skis aren't sharp, or your boots are too loose, or your poles are too short, your goggles are icing up. So we do UX testing, but we typically encourage our customers to do it after fixing all the technical underlying issues, because otherwise the UX testers just have a terrible time. It's a waste of everyone's time and resources. So every engagement we do, we cap off with some UX testing to make sure that people can actually interact and that we've created a barrier-free experience. So yeah, what we're doing is basically putting together a suite of tools here to make our website, to help our clients make websites accessible and really do it the right way from the ground up. And that's it.
This is Heidi. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for all that information. I'm curious if there have been questions that are coming in on the chat box. We have a couple minutes, and then we have some wrap-up things. And Peter and some of the folks from the accessibility team will be with us at office hours next week. But how are people doing with that information? Thumbs up. I often say I'd rather be hugging a tree or writing a poem than talking about the law. I think I'm going to add technology to that because it's a lot, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful. Yeah. Are there questions though? Do we have anybody?
There was one in the chat that Peter already put that link to, which is great. And I do, Peter, you said for next week, you're going to be able to, and the question was a referenced site. And so that's in there. And oh, okay, great. So we have a question. Do you have tools that help with images being dark mode friendly? I keep my laptop in dark mode and often find I'm unable to see presentation materials because the images or graphics or text does not flip to dark mode. Any thoughts, Peter?
I can't think off the top of my head, on anything that would help make a dark mode friendly. You might try to, depending on how you're keeping your laptop in dark mode, you might think about the different layers. So your operating system might have color contrast tools within it that can help, or a grayscale setting, for example, that might fix the images within it. but it's, it all depends on the layer, and it depends on if people are making the underlying content and presentation dark mode friendly. So that's a great example of if someone's not thinking about this when they're putting together a website, it's just not going to work. So can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I would say there might be settings on your operating system, or maybe even an app you could install on your operating system that would help do it from really kind of like a computer level instead of a browser level, and that might be helpful.
There's a few other questions, and some of these might, I encourage folks to come to the office hours too, because I think this is a really detailed, very, very specific, some great questions. So one of the questions is, what about platforms like WordPress out of the box, suggested plugins that can help?
Yeah, so out of the box, Shopify, some platforms are better than others. So Shopify, for example, all of a sudden, all these merchants started getting sued and were confused about it. And so Shopify has made its debut theme accessible and its checkout accessible. So if you download, not download, but if you sign up for Shopify right out of the box, it's going to be accessible. But once you start installing your own theme, putting your products up, now the responsibility is on you. WordPress as well. Like, we love WordPress because it's open source. You can edit anything you want on it. And WordPress, their default themes that are typically named after the year that they're released, so they come out with a new one every year, the default themes are now accessible. So yes, out of the box, WordPress is really solid, but you just need to be careful as you're editing and modifying your content that you're doing things in an accessible manner. And then I would just say, be careful of tools where you can't modify any kind of code, underlying code. So like Wix or Squarespace, some of these platforms, I mentioned Divi Builder. There's a lot of page builders on WordPress that were kind of pre-Gutenberg block editor. That's Gutenberg's a WordPress default thing. But there's a lot of kind of easy do everything tools out there that don't let you touch the code. Before you implement something like that, you really got to dig into the web accessibility of it and see. So what you probably want to look for is a VPAT. That's called a Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And that is a report that lets you see how accessible is this application. So look up, Shopify VPAT, WordPress VPAT, and that's a good place to start. So just be careful what tool you choose, basically. And any one, the more flexibility, the more kind of open source they are, the more chance there is that someone's going to be able to, with a little know-how, get in and modify the code. I'm going to paste this too. This is a Chrome extension we've developed in-house that's free, called Accessible Web Helper. You can install this in your browser, and when you land on a page, you can click the icon. It'll scan the page for automated accessibility errors. So again, this is only 35% of full Wcag 2.1 AA success criteria. But the first spot check is just install something like this. There's also one called Wave Scanner. But you can install our Chrome extension, scan a page, and that's going to tell you, are there 30 errors on this page or there's 0 errors? And that can really give you a good idea as a starting point.
I just want to pause us for one moment because we're just at 10:30, and so want to recognize that time. Peter and Heidi, I don't know if you have a few minutes. We have just a couple more questions, and if there's a minute just to answer those. But I also, Heidi, if there's any business that we need to take care of before other folks might want to log off.
I was just going to say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Peter, for this information and this time. And I appreciate sort of this arts parallel of process alongside the product, that this is something from the start, designing for accessibility in mind and heart. And so thank you for that. Peter will be with us and some others at the open office hours next Tuesday. We will send follow-up email from today with the resources in the chat box, other bonus things, as well as a follow-up survey. So please do let us know how your experience was, what we can do better, what you liked. We do read those and make changes. And I think that's it for today. Again, thank you all for being here too. Yeah, thanks for your time and your care for accessibility. You're in this space because you want to have the world accessibility and inclusive of people with disabilities. So thank you for that. And then if we can linger on now for the other questions, but if you need to go do what's next, as always, depart if you need to, but I think we can try to address the questions and maybe follow up with some of that information in the email as well.
Great.
Does that work for you, Kat? Make sense?
Yeah, and right now there's just one more question, and so I think so at the moment, and then I bet next week we'll have some more. But this was from Eliza, and this says, "I'm looking at translating portions or all of our site into a range of other languages, some of which are not included in Google Translate. Does translation fall into accessibility? And if or if not, do you have suggestions for tools that help with that?"
Yeah, so on the topic of Google Translate, that's one of the tools that people use all the time. That they've done a great job over the past few years to update their tool to be accessible. For a while, there was requirements that you had to have all these languages, and they're, when you use Google Translate to implement translations, it wasn't accessible for folks with disabilities. So they've definitely done a great job over the past couple of years improving their web accessibility. If you want to, Eliza, be doing multiple languages, the best / smartest way to do this is to use localization with like .po files. So what you would do is build your website so that the text was contained in variables. So it could be homepage heading 1, homepage heading 2, homepage heading 3, homepage paragraph, homepage nav item 1, homepage nav item 2, right? So you would basically, instead of writing your language, writing the copy, the content on the HTML file, you would write it to a variable. And then what you do is you have localization files that are a list of the variables with their associated text, because then what you can do is you can take your English.po file and give it to a French translator and say, hey, here's all the different text on that we have on our site, and they can very rapidly run through and translate the different snippets of language into the appropriate language. If you don't use a .po file, you basically need to get a translator that can like come in and know where in your CMS or where in your code base they need to change all these languages, which can really be time intensive, and it just doesn't typically, it's going to take a lot more time. It's going to take a lot more resources. So localization is a term for it, .po file. Yeah, it's portable object localization is what PO stands for. So ideally I would look up that, and that's the best way to do it, but that kind of requires a pretty base level foundational rework of your website to change everything into variables.
And just in case I heard something different in this, if Eliza, you were wondering about the language itself wasn't available in the translator and what the legal parts of that were disability, it might be worth calling the New England ADA Center. That's the group that we often recommend, and maybe Kat, if you're with the computer wizardry, you can either put that in the chat box or in the follow-up email. New England ADA, they provide anonymous technical assistance around the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I find them, in addition to the specifics of the technologies, if it's really about the law and, do we need to have every language included in this translating thing, they can tell you whether that falls within the ADA or something else. So I would, and if you've never called the New England ADA, I think it's worth just saying hi and, asking about what they do and how they do it, because they're really, not that everybody has time to just for a friendly hello, but they really are a valuable resource, and impersonal and anonymous, and can help provide guidance and feedback, and sometimes a little laugh about some of this stuff.
Awesome. And that's now in the chat. And Eliza had also shared before, which is great, that some of it, they're probably actually going to use some real live translators to do some of it, which is awesome. And so great for using that workaround. And yeah, wonderful. While we're here, any other last minute questions? And if not, we'll see you this time next week. And also, Pete, just if you didn't see it in the chat, lots of thank yous from everybody as they were leaving. Lots of people just saying, you know, informative, and so much information, and it's just so rich. And so thank you so much. Anything else before we all head out?
I think there's a poem starting with like PO locator.
We're going to take the transcript and do found poetry with
Found
tech
poetry.
words. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Well, amazing, everyone. And if you have any, like Peter said, amazing. We're going to have some really specific folks who can help really get into those detailed questions next week. So if you come back with us, it'll be the three of us and then more of Pete's staff next week, so we can all get into that and kind of do some problem solving and do some really specific questions. So we hope to engage with you again. And great. And Elle just shared, thanks for this very grateful, very helpful information. Grateful you shared all these great resources and tips. Wonderful. So glad
Thanks,
it was
all.
helpful. Yeah.
Thanks,
All right,
Peter.
everyone. Have wonderful
everybody.
days.